Welcome everyone to the London Buddhist Centre. Particularly welcome to you if it's your first time here. That's great. Particularly welcome to the youngest member of our audience. Even better. You're 6. That's fantastic. And you're already sitting in meditation by the look of it. That's great. So welcome to you, young and old. Older. Be very careful with one's words nowadays. So I'm going to give a short talk about religion. We've all done that, haven't we? It seems a particularly strange thing to do. I'm going to do a short talk about religion. I want to leave a bit of time for questions, so there's enough time for you to ask me stuff. See how it goes. It's a rather informal talk, and talk is too grand a term. I'm just going to chat about my own reflections about religion. Actually, for me, it's a very important subject, and I want to say something about that. And then there'll be time for questions. Just to introduce you to me, my name is Maitreyabandhu. I'm a member of the Tree Rat in the Buddhist order. That's why I'm wearing this kesa, and that's why I've got a long name like Maitreyabandhu. I was ordained 26 years ago, and I've lived here in the London Buddhist Centre for about 29 years, 30 years, I think, something like that. I'm part of the furniture. In fact, I've been here so long, I was saying I'm not part of the furniture. I should at least be some sort of fixture, like the fire escape or something. Okay, so I want to wind into this subject of religion, which seems to me, I suppose my main thing I wanted to say was I think this is, for me, the most important question, the question of religion. Which in a way can seem such an odd thing to start with because religion, for most of us, doesn't figure in our life very much. And there's, understandably great concern about religion. But I've come to think that it may be the most important question, in a way, the question of religion. Have you got a cushion to sit on? You don't want to sit? You all right? Okay. So in a way, my main take-home point is that I think that religion may be the most important subject, and that what we most need is religion. And I'll leave you arrested on that thought, and you can see where we get to, whether I manage to convince you of that. So I thought, as I started my starting point, I've recently been reading, I read quite a lot of poetry. I write poems. Always slightly embarrassing to admit, but there you go. Get that off my chest from the start. So I read a lot of poetry. I've been recently rereading American poetry, like the poetry of Robert Frost. I've recently read a biography of Wallace Stevens, a great American poet. I wonder whether a few team members might take a few cushions over there, because otherwise anyone coming in late won't have anything to sit on before I start. Make sure you're comfortable. So I find myself really attracted to a particular range of poets. So I've been reading Robert Frost. I read wonderful poet Elizabeth Bishop, if anyone knows her work. She's really tremendous. She's one of my great heroes. I've sort of become obsessed with Wallace Stevens, the English poet W.H. Auden. And what I noticed just recently that they're all around the same time. The sort of poets that I'm particularly drawn to are all around the same time. And one of their primary concerns is a world without God. That's really, like for someone like Robert Stevens or even Bishop to a degree, is this problem of a world without God. All of them, their parents would have been believers. Robert Frost's mother was a devout believer. Stephen's mother was a devout believer. They all of those poets come from that time where God was dying, as it were, and a whole question about the meaning of meaning was arising. So, for instance, Wallace Stevens wanted to fill the gap left by religion with poetry. He said, in fact, very famously, God and the imagination are one. But he struggled all his life to try and find a way of creating effectively a new religion or speaking about something in sort of religious terms without God. All of them, I think, have a real sense that life has within it some intrinsic meaning and value. All of them have this sense that there's something important about life, even sacred about life, even holy about life. But none of them could believe in God. Whether it's Frost or Stevens or Bishop or Auden, none of them could believe in God. And yet they couldn't quite get rid of him. They couldn't quite disavow him, because their experience through their own lives and through trying to write poems seemed to keep on seeing in ordinary things a certain kind of shine, a certain kind of mystery, even a certain kind of sacredness. Even someone, more contemporary poet like Seamus Heaney, by the end of his wonderful life as a writer of poetry, they become more and more kind of religious, effectively, although he wasn't a believer. So I'm struck by that, and that they've got something the reason they've got something to say is because they're trying to deal with this absence of God. Heaney thought that poetry is the only art form that can never be completely secularized. And he said that's why you read poems in funerals, for instance. You don't read bits of novels, you don't play various things, you don't bring in a sculpture, but you almost always will read a poem, because poems can never be fully secularized. And that's a person writing modern poetry who's doesn't believe in God and probably is further away from it than someone like Frost. So what excites me about all that is it chimes with something in myself, which is that life has intrinsic meaning and value, which needs to be discovered through your own experience. That's for me why it's so important. The great question of life, really, if we were to sort of think deeply enough, is there or is there not meaning to being? That seems to me the vital question. Is there or is there not meaning to being? And I think all great work is struggling with that. So much of our life is struggling with that. Is there or is there not meaning to being? Now, all of those poets, they're all on the back of someone like the German philosopher Nietzsche, who declared the death of God, very famously. He says, "We have murdered him." There's wonderful. Nietzsche writes incredibly poetically. He says something like, "Who gave us the sponge that wiped away the entire horizon?" In other words, the horizon between the secular, the secular and the divine, the gross and the divine. Who took a sponge that took away the horizon of our life? So there's no up anymore. There's no angelic hierarchy. There's no God anymore. We've just wiped away the whole horizon. People often talk about Nietzsche and the death of God as if Nietzsche thought that was a good thing. He thought it was just a fact. It's striking that he said, "We have murdered him." He thought it was just a fact. And he thought it was an extremely important fact, because all of our ethical system, of course he's talking from Germany in the 19th century, where he's not very aware of other cultures, but he was saying all of our ethical system is based on a belief in God. Actually, we've lost that belief, and our ethical system is sitting on a belief that we no longer believe in. And he said that what will happen is you'll end up with nihilism, you'll end up with ethical relativism, you'll end up with chaos. In fact, it's remarkable with Nietzsche that so much of his predictions have come to pass. Interestingly, he was also very critical of Buddhism. He didn't know much about it, but he thought that Buddhism was really a kind of stoicism. He thought that being a Buddhist was like being a good cow, where, you just sort of gaze benignly over a fence, waiting to die, That was his idea of what he thought Buddhism was trying to teach. Doesn't quite capture it. Nice try. He was actually worried about Buddhism because he thought it would be a new way of kind of teaching nihilism. Actually, even that prediction, I think, is nerve-wrackingly close to being true at times. Buddhism itself easily gets confused with a kind of psychology, a kind of stoicism, which is not at all. I want to try to, in this little talk, good heavens, say what Buddhism is. So Nietzsche's talking about the death of God. He's saying we've killed him. He's saying that actually we just can't do this anymore, folks. And he thought that was of incredible importance because he thought that all of our values were stacked up on that belief. He was going to, before he went mad, which they think now was to do with congenital syphilis, he was going to write a book called The Reevaluation of All Values. That's what he thought was the important thing to do now. You had to reevaluate all values because God, which you'd put your value on, we no longer could believe in. We just couldn't do that. And just yesterday I was at a children's party. I got two little girls in my life who would definitely not like to be called little girls because Alex is just becoming 10 and Ria is just becoming 9, and they're almost university age in their own mind. But I was really struck by Alex's birthday yesterday that I was doing the games master. Nothing is quite as stressful as a 10-year-old's birthday party. I've got lots of other things to do in my life, but crikey, that's been the one thing I've been worried about. How do you manage pass the parcel? Anyway, I won't stress you out thinking about that. The karaoke went well, is all I can say. But what really struck me, I've been doing pass the parcel for Alex and Ria since pretty much, since they could unwrap parcels, at least since they were 2. And with Alex's yesterday, it was the end. I could really, we did pass the parcel and they did it, but they actually now know that it's rigged. They know that there's going to be a present in every layer, and they even know that we stop the music so everyone gets one. So even at one point they said, no, Taya hasn't got one yet. Oh, right, okay, sorry. Yeah. You've stopped at the wrong place because I've already got one? Okay, so, I saw, it's quite slightly poignant, the death of magic. And, every year we have a treasure hunt. You can't imagine how difficult it is to get gold coins, chocolate coins at this time of year. I went to somewhere, I felt they said we don't have any. I felt, do you realise the import of that? I cannot turn up at this party without chocolate coins. People don't understand the import of that. I need to write to the Guardian. Anyway, I did eventually procure chocolate coins, and you hide them. But now they just kind of know they're chocolate coins, and Maitreyabandhu runs up early and hides them. And some of them, halfway through the treasure hunt, were already bored and were chatting on a swing, So I witnessed the death of magic, the beginnings of the end of magic. Actually, it's terribly sad because it has to die, but if we can't re-access it, our lives get poorer and poorer and poorer. If we're not careful, we end up condemned to prose, condemned to facticity, as philosophers might say, condemned to mere facts, which we lose magic. And you sort of have to lose it, but good heavens, you need to find a way of rediscovering it. But I saw them at the end of magic. And that moment in human life, I think, is Nietzsche just saying, look, we've got to that moment, we're now 10-year-olds with God. We just can't do it anymore. We can't believe it anymore. He probably even might have thought that if you try to, it's kind of unhealthy. You have to do something strange with your modern mindset. And yet he thought it was a huge regret because you would lose this sense of life being sacred. You would lose the holiness of things. And you'd end up with a dreadful nihilism. He almost predicts, Dawkins in a way. what he predicts, a kind of more and more ideological secularism, which is becoming just as ideological as religion. So he thought we'd kind of grown out of God, just as children grow out of parcel. And you see how that is actually a really important moment. We've got to find a way, each of us individually, to get back to magic, not to disavow magic. A life without magic in it isn't a fully human life. That's what religious ritual, religious prayer, the cathedrals, the incense, the robes, the holding up the host, the doing the cross, they're all actually the language of the imagination. They're all incredibly symbolic, imaginative feats. As Stephen says, God and the imagination are one. So I remember, I was brought up in the Church of England, and I remember on Good Friday they'd cover the cross with a black cloth. There's hardly any. I wish I'd been brought up a Catholic. There'd be more colour. But there's hardly any of that in the Church of England. As long as you can organise a good jumble sale, you're fairly all right. But we used to at least cover the cross on Good Friday. And I remember finding it really exciting, the drama of that. I was reading a friend's poem recently, and he was brought up in Catholic Ireland, a rural, very poor Catholic island, and up to Good Friday, they even didn't ring the bell, they just clapped pieces of wood together. So there was not even the slightest sound of jubilation. You just have these wooden things clapping together, which I didn't know that you did that. Of course, all of that could be hugely damaging, especially if it's unhealthy. So one of the great legacies, I mean great in the negative sense, of religion is guilt. No one knows the etymology of the word guilt, which is itself an etymology. No one knows where the word comes from. And guilt is like that, isn't it? You can feel guilty without really without knowing what it is you've done wrong. Just a background sense that there's something inevitably wrong with you. And if you pause too long, if you introspect too much, your instinct is that there's something basically wrong with you. I think it really is one of the terrible legacies of God, is that there's something basically wrong with you, and you need to get around that somehow. You need to atone for that. So what you've ended up with now, weirdly, is... God is really making a comeback, isn't it? When you talk about God, it depends where you're talking about religion. If you're talking about Christianity in America, it's a very, very different thing to Christianity in England. I was reading about the presidential campaign and how many of the candidates are, believers in Genesis and so on. Really, really quite worrying. Sort of a kind of madness, I thought. So you've got a terrifying rise of religious extremism, which we're seeing more and more. I mean, I've been saying recently, God is making a comeback, and he's really, really annoyed, having been murdered by Nietzsche in the 19th century. He's in a really bad temper, and this time it's personal. So you've got this terrible rise of religious fanaticism, extremism. But weirdly, you've got this rise of secular dogmatism, of an increasingly strident, dogmatic secularism. Dawkins being the obvious example, but he's not the only one, where secular becomes its own ideology, and with the same kind of, starts to have the same entrenched belief system as a religion. It's weird. If you push secular too much, it becomes kind of religious in an odd way. So we're in a very odd position, I think. We've then God has died. For many of us, we just simply can't believe. I just couldn't believe anymore. I remember even as a child, I used to sing in the choir. I went to church 3 times a week, at least, and I really loved all the singing and the colour. But I knew that I didn't believe. I remember thinking, okay, I do believe, but I knew I didn't really. And you see how, for me, out of that moment of knowing, when I was wearing my vestments, my red cassock and my white, can't remember what they're called. I was the head boy for a while, until I was sacked. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Only for not attending. But, for me, that sense of I don't believe did begin this question, is there or is there not meaning to being? Does being have intrinsic meaning or not? If it doesn't, what do you do? I mean, the only answer to that really is enjoy yourself as much as possible and die young. If it does, how could it possibly mean anything without God? Yeah. That's, in a way, that question for me was born, and I tried to answer that question. First of all, one way I tried to answer that question was in politics. So I thought that the answer to that question, is there or is there not meaning to being, was no, and that therefore the only thing that we could do is try and make this world a better place, because this world was all there was. So what we needed to do is create a just society, so that everybody who lived had as good a life as possible. I still believe that, but not on the same basis. So I became a Marxist. Actually, I had no idea what Marxism was. I think I might have just said it to upset my mother. Anyway, I believed I became a Marxist anyway. And I thought that the cause of suffering was political. And then I went to art school. I was at art school with people like Damien Hirst and Sarah Lucas. I was the one that didn't succeed. I'm the one who didn't make all that money. And I thought somehow for a while that the answer might be art. That again, that art somehow would replace heaven and all the angels and all the hymns. It was only when I cycled here to learn meditation and sat in front of this Buddha. I remember the first time I saw this figure. I just thought, they've got one, how comical, how very Zen. I was at Goldsmith's art school where, a burnt piece of tyre was sculpture, So coming in here having a gold figure, I just how funny they've got one of those. And I remember finding it sort of funny and sort of marvellous at the same time. It felt terribly 19th century to me, people all around me were doing conceptual art and, I won't go on, but I learnt the mindfulness of breathing here, the meditation of the breath, and I immediately knew I was a Buddhist, and I always had been, and I always would be, and that there was intrinsic meaning to being, and there was a wholly other way of discovering that. So what I believe we need, of course, I think we do need religion. I think without religion, the world will get more and more and more and more dangerous. It already is terrifyingly dangerous. The divisions in the world now are, everybody, it's just a truism, but they're completely unsustainable. The division between rich and poor, the difference between the first world and any other world are a breaking point. There's even some writers who think this is the beginning of the end of capitalism. The breakdown of which will be absolutely terrifying and horrendous. The only thing that will even begin to solve those divisions is some kind of religion. It's certainly not going to be art, darling, is it? It's not going to be reading Wallace Stevens. That attempt to, create poetry that sort of stood for heaven in the hymns. It's never going to work. There needs to be a mass movement, not amongst a few overeducated elite. It needs to be a mass movement. It needs to be based on some transcendent ideal that the many people can relate to in lots of different ways. But it needs to be transcendent. Otherwise, why will you give up anything? Why will you make an effort? Why will you try and change your mind? Unless there's some intrinsic meaning. And of course, as soon as you start talking about it, it all gets a bit woolly, but some intrinsic meaning which goes beyond you, but is not separate from you. What we've created is a world that, if we think of a beyond, we've literalized that into a God that's separate to us. Do you see what I mean? So any sense of something beyond us at least in the so-called West, wherever that is, the developed world, has been put into a thing called God in God's various guises, something beyond us and separate to us. I've never believed in that. But how do we find transcendent meaning which is beyond us but not separate from us? Nietzsche's concern was to try and find meaning out of being itself. His great criticism of the whole Christian Judaic traditions were that meaning and value were trying to give you from outside, and they need to grow out of your actual being. Actually, without knowing, he was writing very, very close to what Buddhism's trying to do, but he didn't realise that. It's trying to say, if you go deep enough, you discover intrinsic meaning and value. And it's that meaning and value it's very difficult to say because it's sort of nothing to do with you and yet intimately you. In my own discoveries of it, whether it's in meditation, in friendship, in work, in my life here at the centre, it's discovering this intrinsic meaning and value, is there or is there not meaning to being, feels both intimate and personal and at the same time universal. It's that motivates me. All my life I've needed to know, is there or is there not intrinsic meaning to being? My answer used to be no, there isn't. Now I think yes, there is, but it's a yes beyond the normal yes and no. What we've ended up with in the modern world is either yes, there is meaning, and that is God in one or other of his manifestations, or no, there isn't, and that is this secular, nihilistic, individualistic culture where the only answer to life's issues is to go shopping. And that's all we've got left. If you go to Westfield, just down the road, it is our contemporary cathedral. It's what we've got left. And it's terribly tragic if you go around there. You'll find that your psyche will last an hour at maximum, and then you sort of dissolve into a pool on the floor. There are all these beautiful images of things that most people can't afford. You can even go and buy a car there, and of course Gucci clothes and so all these things that you just can't afford, but are like the supreme unction of the Catholic Church. There's something ravishing, and again, they're imaginative objects that you can't have. As soon as you have them, they sort of start to lose their sheen, don't they? Have you ever had that with clothes? You buy something gorgeous, you get home and you think, oh, has immediately gone down a few pegs just in the journey home, you know. It's like it's gone off. So what you tend to have in most life is, yes, there is meaning to being, and that means God. In America, that's becoming terrifying. In many places in the world, that is becoming terrifying, because if you don't go for that yes, we have to hurt you. We have to do something to make you go for that yes. Really, it's quite terrifying. And the conviction that people can have about those things, really quite terrifying and very, very dangerous. Or you have this no, there isn't meaning, and what you end up with is Westfield. What you end up with is this terrible sense that life doesn't really mean anything, that your own life doesn't participate in anything, that there isn't meaning to being, that there isn't meaning to being together even. One of the things, great symptoms of this no is this increasing social isolation. So before we know it, all of us will only ever have friends on Facebook. This increasing atomization and isolation. There's no meaning to community. One of the values of the church, even the church I grew up in, was its community. You had an experience of community. It was a community shot through with all kinds of problems, but it was at least community. And boy, if anything we need now is a community. But we need a community that can embrace everyone, where there is something that you can even believe, some transcendent meaning, some intrinsic meaning to being, which everyone can have direct access to, and a meaning and intrinsic meaning to being, which you can have practices to cultivate and discover, places to cultivate and discover that. That's what the Buddhist centre here is. That's why we just built a new retreat centre, is to create places. in which you can discover the intrinsic meaning of being, which is not just the intrinsic meaning of being about, for me, it's to do with us. It's to do with community as much as it's to do with me. That being human is intrinsically meaningful. And it's not a meaning that you have to give it. You discover it in a way that a poet discovers the meaning of the poem in writing about it. That's what Stevens was trying to say, I think, is that if you allow your imagination to flourish, you discover meanings that are deeper than you knew. You discover there was more to you than you thought, and that the meaning isn't put on life by you, it's discovered, uncovered by you. And even that meaning can become so glorious, it can feel quite separate from you. I've had experiences of meaning which, had it been 100 years previously, I would have thought were meetings with God, quite directly. I won't go through the story of it, but I've had quite a few experiences which, if it was 100 years previously, or if I was around the time of Nietzsche, I think, no, I've definitely had experience of God. Direct experience, and it was majestic and blissful, and all of my questions were answered in that experience. But as soon as you do that, you reify it into this abstract thing called God. Buddhism has never had that. Sometimes people say to me, what does Buddhism say about God? Well, it just never arose. It doesn't have that. If anything, if you look at the very earliest Buddhist scriptures, the idea of God is slightly made fun of. But you see that without that transcendent meaning, there's really no basis to act ethically, for instance. You may as well just have a good time and get as much as you can for yourself. If our value systems are always based on our beliefs, if we don't believe in anything, that actually life is just chaos and then you die, there's really no real need for ethics. So that's what Buddhism is. I think it's either not a religion or it's the only religion. Either we just say, actually, tell you what, let's just deal with this. This is a problematic word. Let's just say, no, religion doesn't work. Because usually people associate religion intrinsically with some kind of God figure or gods. Buddhism doesn't believe in that, so from that point of view, you just say it's not a religion. The trouble is, it's not a philosophy either, because in the Western term of philosophy, usually, apart from people like the existentialists, there's no practice of philosophy. Schopenhauer doesn't say how you do it. He just talks about the nature of reality through philosophical lens, going from Kant. So it's not a philosophy. It's not a depth psychology either. Weirdly, Buddhism's not Buddhism either. Just to make it a bit further, isms are a Western idea: Marxism, capitalism, Buddhism. There's no word in Buddhism that translates as Buddhism. The word that the Buddhists used was the Dharma. Dharma is sometimes translated as teaching, but it means something more like the real truth. The truth of things, is a better way of thinking about it. So there's no word of Buddhism, because that suggests an ideology primarily. What the Buddha said, he said, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. In other words, he's saying, I'm not interested in teaching an ism, I'm not interested in teaching a religion, a psychology, a philosophy, political system. What I'm interested in is the fact of suffering and how to completely escape suffering. But his idea of suffering isn't just, literal suffering, but the suffering that we currently would think is us in a good mood. He wants to point us to experiences that are so far beyond our sense of ourselves that we really wouldn't recognise ourselves. Experiences that using Western language, you'd want to call holy, except for that suggests a really existing, separate, transcendental God, which Buddhism has never had. So it seems to me, without religion, in this deeper sense, some really existing transcendental meaning, which can connect me with you across gender, across race, across incredible differences, Recently we were having some Indian order members, members of the same order staying with us, and trying to talk to these. They come from the poorest possible world of India, unimaginably poor. And I was trying to talk about how what you do when you get down to the bottom of the escalator. I said, you turn right. And he was looking at me and I said, so bottom of the escalator, I was at the tube station, turn right. And I thought, I'm not sure I'm getting this through, so I'll go down with you. So I went and put it on the train, and then he got to his location. He rang me and said, okay, I'm there. Do I turn right? I said, no. That was like, never mind. How do you cross those incredibly different barriers, with different views about everything from, homosexuality to, you name it, crime, to meaning, to devotion. You need some kind of transcendent experience which can connect all human beings with all human beings, without which all you've got is policy, and you've got this terrifyingly developing threat of a new fundamental Christianity and other Islam, for instance. You've also got this the rise of the right wing. You're starting to see it everywhere, aren't you? But in some places, really, really frighteningly, because the right easily gives you a sense of assurance of we're the good people, these are the bad people, all of those terrible things. What we need is some kind of transcendental meaning which can unify us all and motivate us to start acting ethically, to base our values on real values, not on dead ideas, and not on nihilism, because there isn't any values really in nihilism. I just want to finish, I talked a bit too long, but I wanted to finish with this funeral I went to recently of somebody I got to know quite quickly, and then he died suddenly and tragically. And I was terribly shocked by his death. And I wrote to his wife and said, if I can, I'd like to say something at the funeral. And I went to his funeral, wasn't so long ago, in a very prestigious place, full of very, very highly educated people. I think I might have been the only person there not a professor. It felt like if you hadn't written a book. And I went there, and it was a secular funeral. And halfway through it, I really felt like saying, this really isn't good enough, folks. You're not going to do it like this, are you? Of course, there's something always sort of so sad about funerals, but there was there's just no way of feeling anything. Like, one of the things that struck me was that, the coffin was there, of course. Nobody made any reference to it. It might not have been there. So you had to go, you went to, quite a few people did eulogies, and we went and stood in front of the coffin and spoke into a microphone in this rather gorgeous place. And no one referenced the body. So you must say there is actually a dead body in the room. Nobody referenced that fact, that there was a body behind them. And everybody, very, very good speakers, hugely educated and cultured. But I wanted to say, is anyone going to say anything about this fact? Here we are, the one fact in the middle of life that we definitely know is going to happen, that we're going to die. It is the only thing that we know for sure. The other thing, of course, we know for sure is that we don't know when that will happen to us. The great, terrifying fact of our human life, there it is in the room. What have we got to say about that? We can't just say they wrote wonderful books. That's not, but what about this fact? That is the fact of human life. And what struck me, and of course, it's from my own perspective, but what struck me is that secular life has got nothing to say about it. But of course, if one really did that honestly, there'd be no reason to have the body there. We would just chucked it away. If you think that really everything life ends when consciousness goes, actually there's nothing to do with the body, is there? The body is just like a wardrobe or, a computer that's finally died, you just chuck it away. There's no need at the end of a funeral to be carrying it out covered with flowers, which is what happened quite obviously and quite rightly. But you know what I mean, there's this weird bit of ritual with very little reference to it. We cannot help, I'll come to questions in a second, we cannot help but you cannot treat a body like a thing. And what a funeral is trying to do is help you move from the impossible thing of being alive, which is as mysterious as being dead. Help you move from that to letting this body become a thing so that you can burn it. But for a long time it can't be a thing. I used to be a nurse and I used to lay out bodies quite often when I was on the ward. No way is it a thing. You have to talk to the person. You have to say, I'm going to roll you over now. Don't worry. You have to talk. You can't thing it. And I think it's our instinct. People want to say that's sentimental, but I think it's our instinct that human life is more than that thing. Otherwise, if you really believed in this secular nihilistic thing, you just get rid of it. It's just a thing, like any other broken thing, a clock, a computer. It's broken now, it's bust. Chuck it away. Yeah? Nobody can quite do that because your instinct is no. But there's no language for it. And if there's no language for it at that moment, there's no language for it at any moment. And if there's no language for it, and yet we live in this mythic world, and most of us do, think of our dream life. We're living in a mythic world, not in a literal world. There's no language for that. We become starved of our humanity. I was really struck by this funeral. So because I'm wearing my kesa and I got this funny Buddhist name, I could at least touch the coffin and bow to it. And so I just want to wish you well. I don't know what happens when we die. Nobody knows what happens when you die. Buddhism wants to say there is continuance, but no thing continues, rather complex metaphysical thought. But I just want to wish you well on that journey. I don't know what the journey is, but I can bow to the coffin and wish you well and rejoice in you. Because I don't think it's the end in the way that we think of it in the West. Without religion, we may as well just throw the body away. I better stop so there's a little bit of time for questions. Anyway, that's something of what I was trying to say, So, you had a question, didn't you?
Well, I was going to ask you what you said, but I think you really answered that.
Right, yeah. I was a bit nervous, because as I said, I was the only one that wasn't a professor. And I really just wanted to say, I don't know. I don't know what happens when you die, and nobody does. But that includes that you die in the way that we think of it in the West. That this is just something to get rid of. I don't believe that. I think it's a small thought, and too small for our humanity. And I just rejoiced in him and wished him well. I want to say, I don't know what happens, but good luck on it. But you see how that mystery of death, it's no more mysterious than our mysterious life. Seeing, Alex yesterday, now knowing that actually, the parcel is rigged. So say, no, Lena hasn't got one yet, the end of magic. Think of my own dreams, sometimes when you waken from a dream and you think, God, that was so real. Or sometimes those moments when you look at the world and it just seems like unbearably beautiful. That there's something in all that. There is intrinsic meaning to being. But how do we find that without God? If we're not careful, we've got rid of God and we've got rid of this intrinsic value. I mean, it's interesting that those poets that I started with, the reason I like them so much is they still got that glow of wanting that. If we're not careful, we'll forget that. We'll just think, there isn't intrinsic meaning. That will become our assumption, and all you've got then is shopping. Really, it's all you've got left, the supreme unction of designer clothes. It's not big enough for us. Our humanity is mysterious and vast. We need a religion that only a religion can hold that. And I think that Buddhism is the only religion because it hasn't got a God in it. Any kind of literal, other, transcendent. Of course, the danger of Buddhism is it just gets, and you see it even with Buddhists, is you start to think that Buddhism is just another way of managing this world. It becomes a this world only philosophy if you're not careful, where you think it's just about, getting a bit, cleaning up your head so you've got a better relationship with this world. People can treat Buddhism as it's like defragging your hard disk. I don't think anyone does that anymore, do they? Anyway, whatever you do to your hard disk now, you can think that Buddhism is just doing that, and then you just see this world that really exists. But Buddhism is saying, well, this world doesn't really exist in the way we think of it. We don't exist in the way we think of it. It's not a this world only tradition. It's a transcendent tradition, but not a literally one. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I just have been reflecting as you've been talking. I'm sure, like many people here, I've read a book called Power of Now. By
Yeah.
I'm just interested in how you see I'm sure you've read that too, but how you see that sitting with Buddhism. Because to me, there's kind of a bit of interweaving and.
Yes, there is some. I haven't read it, or rather, somebody showed me a page of it, and I was.
It does have that transcendental.
It does, yeah.
That's kind of not religion, but religion.
Yes, that's right.
But not philosophy. So.
The danger of the metaphor of now is that you destroy a path. What all of us need is a path. I don't think we need any more people saying they're already enlightened or da. What we need is a path. Here's what you do. You need to do that, and then you need to do this. Then you can expect this to happen, so you then need to do that. Isn't it? If you're not, I think the book, if at least it's speaking of that transcendent without God, I very much applaud that. But I don't think it's enough. I think you need a path. I think you need a community. You need friends to help you on your way. You need all of that stuff. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
In a way, do you think Buddhism provides that sort of assurance that other religions do about it? I think, well, for me, I associate religion with sort of fearing the unknown.
Fearing the unknown.
Yeah, and it sort of gives you answers, let's say.
Yes, yeah.
To try and overcome that and give you kind of a belief system.
Yes, that's right.
Do you feel Buddhism can offer that because there's no sort of figure?
Yeah. I don't think it can give you certainty. Schopenhauer apparently once said that what marks out all religions is they offer certainty. And he said that in itself was enough to completely dismiss religion. Because he said that he was thinking of it philosophically. From a philosophical point, there is no possibility of certainty in this life. So he just thought that won't work. So Buddhism can't offer you certainty. So from that point of view, it's not a religion. Can't offer you answers in the way that it tends to be thought. What it offers you is a series of practices to discover the answers for yourself. But it can't offer you certainty, no.
Maybe it helps you to live with uncertainty and to accept that.
It helps you live with it and see the meaning of it, yeah. And go through it even. But Buddhism is primarily something you do, not something you believe, although it involves belief. A bit like football. Something you do. Yeah. Got a question at the front?
Does Buddhism always have the religion like Muslim or something?
Well, sometimes people think this is like a god. Like you can easily think like in Islam, in Catholicism, in Christianity, there's a god. The Buddha is a bit like that, only in as much as he discovered something himself by his own efforts. He became like a god. The like is very important. He discovered in life something more than life, but he's never becomes a god. There isn't a god. Even the gold of the Buddha figure here represents this more to life that's more than yourself, but not separate. But no, sometimes people think of the Buddha as a god. He's not really, but he's not, absolutely not either. Don't know what that clear? Good question. I might need to think about it. The question at the back.
I was interested in how you define religion.
Yeah.
And I guess my path towards Buddhism has come from the echoes of your description of your socialist perspective,
Yeah.
feminist.
Yes, yeah.
And I work in the NHS with broad mental health issues, and I'm also really interested in some of the ideas of Paul Gilbert and others
Oh, yeah,
who
yeah,
have
yeah.
really drawn a lot on the wisdom of Buddhist
That's right,
psychology.
yeah.
And I've experienced some of the experiences, it happened here once actually, I did one of the loving kindness courses,
Mm.
and having an experience that when you said if I hadn't been an atheist, I would have described it as being touched by God.
Yes, that's right,
And
yeah.
that really was very
Strange.
strange.
Yes, indeed.
My adult kids tell me, "Oh, Mum, it's just like taking MD."
Yeah, that's right.
That connection.
Yeah.
But there was something with that powerful feeling of
Yes.
connectedness to others.
Yes,
that
indeed.
was just really powerful.
Absolutely.
So my journey is bringing me towards Buddhism, but there's something about the idea of it being a religion, or
Yeah.
the idea of God, or some of the metaphysical stuff.
Yeah.
That's where I struggle.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm interested in how you, when you're talking about Buddhism being a religion,
Yeah.
what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, probably the easiest thing is just to dispense with it and say it's not. Is the simplest way. Because religion now is so much to do with some kind of literal transcendental other called God. I don't know that you can ever really recast it as being something with some of those things like ritual, the use of story, the use of parable, the use of chanting, the use of meditative practices, all of which are very common to all religions. But I think the word has got so caught up with God that it's probably not usable. So probably the easiest thing is to say it's not a religion. The danger of that is to think, okay, well, it's just a kind of secularism then. And then that doesn't allow you to have that experience and doesn't allow you to make sense of that experience, which means that you're limiting yourself. And what a shame. Yeah. Two more.
I get into a situation where I meet people from other faiths and they seem more compassionate or
Yeah.
they seem quite
Oh, yeah.
generous and whatnot.
Yeah.
How do you go about thinking about, like, if that compassion is based off?
Yeah.
How do you work with that?
Yeah, it's weird to talk about something like Buddhism. Buddhism is itself as an abstraction. What you've got is individual Buddhists. You can have a wonderful... I think Buddhism is the, very inverted commas, religion of the modern world. Without it, I can't think of anything else that will help. But that doesn't mean to say that people practice it very well. I've known Buddhists that I don't think very highly of at all, and I've known Christians particularly. I don't know many, and I think of a woman that brought me up, for instance, who was very devout. I think she was wonderfully compassionate. A friend of mine's mother, she was a very devout Christian, and I thought she was more impressive than some Buddhists I've met. So you can never say, because of the system, you end up with a certain sort of person. Strangely, even terrible systems, some people just seem to be just naturally more than that. So I don't think you can then say all you need to do is say you're a Buddhist. Buddhism is something you need to live up to, and it's incredibly demanding to live up to it. In a way, it's a shame to abstract it because you end up with something like, oh, this is better than that. Actually, you have to look at each individual. I've known, for instance, people with no faith at all to have more humility, more ethical sense than some of the Buddhists I've known. So you can't ever say, because they do this, they are like that. I think that's a mistake and a foolish one.
So, what is the concept of life after death in Buddhism?
So it's quite a small question to nearly finish. That's straightforward. Yeah. Well, it's always best to go back to what the Buddha said, because I don't know. I actually don't know what happens when you die, nor do you, nor does anybody. Nobody knows. We don't know. Everything we say about it are beliefs, including that you die. So when Dawkins talks about death is the end, that is not a fact, it's a belief. It's a belief disguised as a fact. That's the problem with secularism. It looks like they're sets of facts. They're just beliefs disguised as facts, which is really rather naughty. Anyway, so he doesn't know either, I don't know, we all don't know, nobody knows. Whew, what relief. So what Buddhism says Well, nice not to know something for a change. What Buddhism says is it's not the end. So one idea is the no, it's the end. Buddhism is absolutely not true. That's what the Buddha said. And then, someone else would say, well, so does that mean you go to heaven? He said, absolutely not. No, that's not true either. So does that mean that you're constantly reincarnated into, like, I die now, but then I get bored as Mrs. So-and-so next door? No, that's not true either. So is it, okay, what am I left with? The whole of Buddhism, in a way you could understand, is trying to discover something beyond that yes and no. The tagline is there is continuance, but no thing continues. So the Buddha said it's like, your life is like a great fire burning. Just before it goes out, a spark jumps across it and lights another fire. Now that next fire is a different pile of wood, it's a different fire. But there's some kind of causal connection. It's a spark. The trouble is even a spark becomes a thing. It's not like that. But there's some kind of causal connection. I don't understand that, but I'm open to it. It's a doctrine of rebirth. But there's some kind of causal connection. It's not no, and it's not yes. It's not yes, you carry on forever. Either you're continually reincarnated, or you go to heaven or hell forever. That's not true. But neither is it you, and that's the end, nothing, dead, zilch, curtains. That's not true either. In fact, the Buddha seemed to think that was worse. He said that eternalism is wrong, misguided, and helpful to a whole list of epithets. He said all exactly the same epithets for nihilism, but he included the word ugly, which I was very struck by. That when he talks about nihilism, he seems to, at least in one sutta, say it's a bit worse because it's ugly.
Maybe you knew something about quantum physics.
Maybe you did, yeah. Seems tad unlikely, but anyway. Okay, we probably better finish there, but thanks very much. Yeah.